Welcome to sunny San Diego for Gravity this season. This series of videos will bring you principle-driven strategies and techniques for the sports of swimming, biking, and running, kind of a triathlon theme. So we hope that these videos bring you innovative ways to think about how you're training your clients, whether recreationally or competitively, for any of the following sports. This segment is on running, specifically the lower body. So we're going to look at the lower body's role of function during a run and reiterate what the principles are during a run, what happens when the foot hits the ground. Running is a wonderful activity that a lot of people like to enjoy. If you're in a triathlon, it's the last part of the race, so you're already spent and you're having to run. So with older people, we'll talk about absorbing force and propulsion. Just up front, I want to say that there are studies that indicate that as we get older, we absorb force. There's a higher force plate at impact, and we propulse. There's less propulsion. So that's kind of a bad equation. If you're absorbing more force and you're propulsing less, that's a bad equation, and you end up with some of these overuse injuries or pain, lumbar pain, knee pain, hip pain, foot pain, shoulder pain, any type of pain. When we run, the foot hits the ground. Obviously, a lot of there's a flight phase in running, and it's usually a one-legged sport, meaning that there's one leg on the ground, and we'll talk about what the other leg is doing as well. When the foot hits the ground, the key thing to know is that everything changes. We've got ground reaction force. It depends on what type of terrain we're on. We're dealing with momentum of mass. We've got ground reaction force. It's a whole body movement. There's a lot of momentum. It's very three-dimensional. We'll talk about in sync and out of sync, meaning that our shoulders are going to be going in the opposite motion as our pelvis, and that creates a lot of propulsion and loading through the hip flexors and abdominals. So similar to walking, the foot is hitting the ground, except there's a flight phase. Now, we have sprinting, we have long distance running, we have trail running. There's a huge wide variation of ways to run. There's different stride lengths, lots of variations. So we're just going to focus on kind of your average jog, your average run. Hopefully everything kind of makes sense. The first thing I want to say is there are really no right or wrong ways to run. Everything comes down to the individual. Everybody's built differently. People have different bone lengths, different muscle lengths, different muscle mass. Everything's different, so there's no one right way to run for everybody. There are some common denominators, meaning that you do want to make sure that your abdominals are working, you want to make sure that your butt's working, you want to make sure that your foot's hitting the ground, and keep things kind of sequenced in the right way so that you're efficient. The moment you start to tweak something and you become inefficient, then you start to run out of gas, you start to run into some joint pain. So today's program is our strategy from those principles is going to be to avoid those overuse problems. So we're going to again tweak into 3 planes. We're going to tweak speed, we're going to tweak range of motion, we might add load here, we might tweak something here. It's just all about having happy joints. We want our clients to have happy joints so they can enjoy the sport of running over the lifetime. With our techniques now, from our principles and strategies, we'll get into using the GTS as a modify, and Nicole, of course, as our athlete. So we're going to go into some plyometrics, we're going to go into a little bit of lunging, might add a little bit of tubing, and then we'll go through perhaps a little stretch routine if we have time, and kind of look at some new ways to use the GTS. Our first technique, our first thing to look at is, I'll try to summarize this so we don't get too off on a biomechanical tangent, but when you are running and your foot hits the ground, the job of the lower leg, the calf, some of the muscles, the lateral and medial calf, the hip, and the quad, all are there to help you absorb that force. This is what we're going to be focusing on during this video. So a quick little review is that when the foot hits the ground, you get a triplane stimulus up, all the way up into the hip, all the way up into the shoulders, because when your foot hits the ground, you get an internal rotation of the tibia, which internally rotates the femur, which turns the butt on in the transverse plane. In the sagittal plane, your foot hits the ground, you obviously go through dorsiflexion, which flexes the knee, which helps the hip flex, which turns on the butt in the sagittal plane. And in the frontal plane, it's kind of tricky to see. We have what's called adduction of the knee, or a valgus force in the knee, which drives the femur in, so we get lengthening in the frontal plane in the glutes. Big muscles in the back, there's a lot of mass back there. That's what it's for, absorbing force. So we're going to take a look with Nicole here in a lateral or a side-lying squat. And I'll have you face this direction actually so they can see your calf. Nicole likes to show off her sunny side, right? Is that how we call it? So what we're going to do is focus on a unilateral squat. We'll tuck this leg behind, or you can put it up front, either way. And I'm going to bring your foot all the way back onto the squat stand. Now what I'm watching for here is everybody knows how to do a plyometric squat. We're just going to be looking at different emphasis points. So we've got her at a low angle. You can bring it up to a higher angle. We're just using it today so that you can really she can focus on a lot of repetitions. So it's all I'm gonna have her do. And before we do this, I'm gonna adjust this squat stand actually. I'm gonna lower the squat stand down to the number 1 position so that we can keep her foot in alignment with her hip so we don't get a lot of crazy forces. Now it's all we're gonna do is I'm gonna have her start jumping. I'm not gonna over cue her on technique or form. If it's a real client, I don't even want them to know what I'm looking at, because the moment they know what I'm looking at, then typically they're gonna change it. So what I'm watching for here is how much dorsiflexion of the ankle is the client able to get? Are they able to absorb the force? If you see like a heel coming off the ground, like Nicole, you can see that her heel isn't quite going down into plant face. So there's a little bit of perhaps shortness of the calf, so it gives us stuff to work on. Now what I'm going to do is tweak this in the sagittal plane to help her heel hit the ground. So I'm going to bring her foot forward. Remember, the tri-post, or her vectors now when she's side lying, is that sagittal plane is going to be this way, frontal plane is going to be this way, back and forth, and then transverse plane is over her. So that's important to remember. So if she were standing right now, we just did a sagittal plane tweak. I'm going to have you do that same thing. Good, and maybe just for fun, I don't know if this will work, try landing on your heel first. And this is all the stuff you're told not to do, right? Well, we're not afraid of that business, because when you're running, your heel's hitting the ground first every time. Now granted, your heel is passing through underneath your body as well, but we can use this to kind of get the heel to hit the ground so we can see that force. That gives her success. The heel hits the ground, the heel stays down, and she absorbs that force. The moment I bring her foot into the posterior vector of the sagittal plane, I just wanted to say that because it sounded cool. Now we're taking away from her calf. So now her calf's gonna really have to stretch to get down. We'll have you just do that same thing, just kind of jumping up and down. And of course, I'm doing all the traditional stuff or conventional where I look to see hip, knee, and ankle all lined up nicely. But this is really forcing her to lengthen that calf. It's almost like a side step. Because remember, when you're running, you're not getting a lot of knee flexion. You're getting a little, but not like a deep squat. So with the side-lying squat, or the side-lying plyometric squat, assess the dorsiflexion of the ankle. If we wanted to, let's just have you flip over on your back and just do a traditional squat. You can do this the same way. We just try to mimic the sport of running a little bit more with a little plyometric. Then we can just bring her feet down and then just have her do a regular squat. Now what I watch for when I'm working with the client for dorsiflexion, what tells me the limitation of dorsiflexion is as soon as her heels lift off. So I can put my hands under her heels now. And now she's stepping on my hands, which feels great. So that tells me, okay, there's opportunity here. There's opportunity to either maybe hold the heels down and have her come down. Good, back up and down. And that's just gonna facilitate, it's almost like a mobility. So if you're not comfortable doing this with your client, then don't do it. But what you're doing is just helping the calf to lengthen. Now, from your training, you probably know that you can tweak the transverse plane with internal external rotation, or tweak sagittal plane. If she brings her feet up a lot higher, then she's not going to get as much dorsiflexion. So as she comes down, you can see this angle isn't nearly as strong as when she comes way down here. So that's an easy way to find success, find where they're good, and stick with it and grow from there. Okay, so that's kind of the squat, the side-lying squat, whichever you want to call it. Somehow assess their ability to dorsiflex. The next is going to be what we call a reverse lunge. And what that means is we're going to take off this squat stand. I'm the trainer and my client's paying big bucks, so I'm going to do all the dirty work for her. And we're going to have her just turn around, just do a reverse lunge, and I'm going to grab some extra stuff that I like to throw into the mix. And here we're going to do just a reverse lunge, and this is the same concept, is stimulation from the ground up, so we're getting that ground reaction force. It's not a heavy impact like running, but it's still some of the basic movements, dorsiflexion, hip flexion, knee flexion. Now how can we tweak that? We can tweak all the planes. So if I look at this particular plane and I don't want to go frontal, I might have her just hop out with the right foot a little bit and just do that same thing. How's that working with the skort you got on? Is that comfortable? All right. So you've got, and then you can come to narrow, which gets a little bit trickier because now there's less base of support. If their feet are like this, it's less base of support than this. So I watch for dorsiflexion, I watch for alignment of the knee, I watch for the hips. Everything's designed to absorb force there. Now we go a transverse plane tweak and switch legs, and we'll just do an external rotation. And remember, when you do that, to still maintain a nice line, the knee going right over the toe. Kind of goofy, but again, it's going to stretch a little bit more of the calf out on the outside or the lateral port. It's right over to internal rotation, same concept. Now, the other things we can do with this lunge is we've got lots of variations. First of all, we can change the range of motion. So I can have her just work a smaller range of motion or a larger range of motion. So maybe to mimic more like running, we're going to go with a quick, we're going to change the speed and the range. So she's going to do kind of a quick, small range of motion tweak. There we go. Let's see you just for fun today. Nicole, go as fast as you can. So see, you got to have a smiling client. Have some fun. Be careful with this if you're going to be spotting. Perhaps just have that weight bar or wooden dowel or your hands out to catch them in the event they lose their balance. Another thing to do is, because we're focused on absorbing force, is the same component, but I'm going to add a band. And what I'm going to do with that is, if you look at running, you can see that as my hip lengthens on the left side, my shoulder on the right side is driving back. So we'll get into this more with the propulsion phase, but just to kind of segue into it, here we're going to work on loading force, and then what I'm going to have her do is do kind of a lunge and then coming up and then pressing with the band. So we're going to get a little bit of force there. So let's see, we're going to go left leg, reverse lunge. Yes, left leg, reverse lunge, and as you go back, I'm going to have you press forward with the band. It's going to come right along the midline of your body. And this is just tweaks. I like to tweak stuff. And we'll go low elbow, so almost like you're running. So you can come straight up. There you go. I give her a little resistance. Does that feel goofy? Yeah. You know why it's goofy? Because we're on the wrong side. Let's just switch hands. You get a different view anyway. See, trial and error right there. That's what I'm all about, because I certainly can't see it sometimes. It's very complex. So does that feel a little bit different for you? Yeah. Helps to load that hip, load the leg, still getting good dorsiflexion, and then I can do any of those tweaks with regards to the range of motion, to the planes of motion, to anything that I want to do. I can switch it up either with speed, range of motion, tubing, frontal plane, transverse plane, anything you want to do. Last but not least is our pivot lunge, and this is kind of fun. And it's also a little bit dangerous, so we want to be careful here. I'm going to keep it actually at level 3. Okay. I'm going to start you out with you're just going to step onto the glide board and lunge, but keep the glide board in position. That way I can assess my client's ability to absorb that force and to control, because the moment they put their weight into their heel and they press the glide board up, we run into trouble. So I'm going to stay right here until she's got that down. Now what I'm going to have you do is bring your left foot towards me a little bit. I'm going to have you do that same thing, but now add a little bit of glide board movement. So you're going to control it, decelerate, and then come back up. This is kind of a second progression. And then the third progression, once your client demonstrates proficiency of the movement, is to add what's called a pivot step, meaning she's going to step way back, come back up, lunge, and forward. Very nice. That's it. Now, you notice that as she comes onto the glide board, there's sometimes where her foot hits the ground with the ball of her foot. So we want to try to establish the heel hitting the ground first versus that what we call pawing. And that's kind of fun anyway, isn't it? Okay, obviously the tweaks are speed. You can tweak the frontal plane by just doing a wide or narrow stance, and you can tweak the transverse plane with an internally rotated left foot or right foot. All just depends on what you're trying to do. If I were to train a client globally to avoid overuse, I'm going to get as many variations as I can. Each variation gives you a little different stimulus, turns on the proprioceptors, turns on the muscles, lengthens everything before it explodes. Watch the dorsiflexion, watch the glutes, the ability to absorb the force, and if you're done with this type of exercise, it's always nice to do kind of a stretching routine. We won't cover it today, but you can throw the squat stand on, put a knee on, and just kind of lengthen that hip, lengthen the calf, and then drive in all three planes the arms, frontal plane, transverse plane, and sagittal plane. And one more tweak to that pivot lunge. She's going off for a run. Look at that alignment, perfect. With the pivot lunge, as you're going through your pivot lunge, you can also add arm drivers. So you can drive the arms in the transverse plane, you can drive them in the sagittal plane, and you can drive them in the frontal plane. Each one of those, through chain reaction biomechanics, sends a different stimulus down the body, so when the foot hits the ground, the upper body helps or assists in gaining torque through the rest of the body and will help your runner be able to enjoy the sport of running forever and ever and ever.